Welcome everybody. Today we're going to evaluate the role of cultural embeddedness and morality for the analysis of economic systems. In order to, maybe we should first give a definition about culture. There's not really one definition for culture, but we see it as an informal institution which contains the values and the norms of a society. Morality is something in culture, and that explains, for example, respect and trust. Economic systems, we interpreted that as the market in general. We will give some historical and up-to-date examples of the influence of culture on economic development, for example. To start with an article of Plato, he argues that culture was first and that led to economic development. He says that institutions do not cover everything and they're not really effective. And that really the culture of a society is really important and that determines the development of specific countries. An interesting example, we all read like an article about the McGreevy's. And he used that example as well. He says like they had this multilateral punishment system. And that enabled them to solve the principal-agent problem, and their culture made it possible to use the multilateral punishment system, and that just solved that problem, and the markets were more integrated. So that was one example. A second example is from Tabellini. This is more quantitative, for as far culture can be quantitative. Well, he claims that historical institutions will lead to culture and culture leads to economic development. And to avoid like the endogeneity problem, he uses instruments for culture and he uses the institutional, like the historical institutions. And he really can find this relationship between bad institutions on bad culture. And his overall conclusion in the end is that the culture of the 19th century affects the European regional GDP per capita nowadays, which is kind of a big claim to have, especially because he uses proxies for culture. So it is interesting and it shows the importance of culture, but it's not really good evidence, we think. The third one is the article of Granovetter, and he really claims the importance of a social structure. And this article we both found really interesting, because what he said, like one example he gives is whether you like it to hire someone you know via friends already or someone you just don't know. And it is important because it will reduce your asymmetric information. You have adverse selection, which contains hidden characteristic of an employee. So if you hire someone you already know via friends, the chances of adverse selection is lower. So asymmetric information also, which is very good. And that's exactly the same if you think about the Lemon principle in the second-hand car industry, where the guy wants to sell. I mean, that is truly, they say, bad quality drives out good quality. Because the buyer knows bad quality, the seller knows the buyer don't want to pay a lot, so the prices are low and low quality will be sold. And when you have a good relationship with each other and you know each other, the seller will sell the good car and the buyer will buy the high price. So that's very important for markets and very convincing.
And now I'm going to talk about culture, where culture, economy, culture, or economy, culture, economy. I'm going to give a modern example of culture, economy, culture, which is Japan. Japan is a prime example because it illustrates the cultural embeddedness in the economic systems. Being a homogeneous society, the influence of culture within the economy was observable. I'm going to use the example of corporations in Japan now. Most of them were vertically integrated, and this permitted long-term relationships based on trust and less dependent on contracts. And Toyota is a good example of this. In the 1970s, they had over 100 suppliers and worked closely like a community where they will prosper together. Most of the economic systems were driven by a strong national commitment following the destruction of poverty in the past. The strong work ethic and loyalty of the employees were usually rewarded by the loyalty of the industries they worked for, because most of them stayed with that one firm for the rest of their life. They wouldn't usually change in that period of time. And in the sense that they were in this together, and this clearly demonstrates the importance of culture. And I'm going to give an example of economy, culture, economy now, which is the plough versus hoe argument. It demonstrates the effects of different developments to the community culture. The cost of having children, but also the benefits of having children. Therefore, the plough culture showed preference for fewer children, thus lowering fertility, whereas the other culture, there was a huge benefit in having children because it was a labour-intensive system. The writers also argue that the plough culture may have impacted the evolution of economic systems, being that formal laws and institutions to adapt and suit the culture that was developed. That being said, it's also argued that consumerism could have affected the fertility rates, because as children, having children was more expensive in the mass production phase, and so the lure of consumer goods people opted to rather have goods rather than children in this period of time, you could argue. So the conclusion is that cultures that we see as the chicken or the egg question, because you can't really quantify it. A lot of it is based on trust, reputation, and you really can't put that into numbers because there's other things that you have to account for. The examples we show have showed the crucial impact of on economic systems over time.
Perfect, thank you.